As I was studying for today's sermon, I was struck by the beauty of the text in the first gospel lesson. By the tender mercy of God, the dawn from on high will break upon us to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. Beautiful language there, but a bit troubling nonetheless, I think. To guide our feet into the way of peace. Peace is a beautiful notion, I'll grant you that, but I'm not sure it's the easiest sermon to preach on, or topic to preach on, though it is the theme of the day, Advent 2, peace. It's difficult to preach on because I just feel as if peace is so elusive. Violence continues to rage in many parts of the globe. Racism and sexism run rampant, destroying lives, careers, relationships. And I don't need to tell you, political divisions cause strife between people who have been friends for years. As I say, peace seems elusive today. And if peace is up to us, if peace is our responsibility alone, then I fear it will always be elusive. But thanks be to God, it is not always up to us. In the second gospel reading, Luke, referencing John the Baptist, quotes Isaiah. A voice calls out in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord, and everyone shall see the salvation of God." So on the one hand, this work of preparing for the coming of the Lord, yes, it is ours to do, but it's really God who does it. And when God gets through, everything will be different, everything will be new, everything will be right, because God will see to it. Even though peace might be elusive, it puts my heart a little bit more at ease knowing it is God who will achieve it. And now that we know how all this will end, God bringing peace, let's look at how Luke tells us all this began. He says in the 15th year of the reign of Emperor Tiberius, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea and Herod was ruler of Galilee, and his brother Philip, the ruler of the region of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias was tetrarch of Abilene during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. The word of the Lord came to John, son of Zechariah, out in the wilderness. Now, you may not see the point of all of this, of Luke listing all these rulers. I mean, why should we care who was the ruler of Iturea? What does it matter anyway who was the tetrarch of Abilene? My friends, it matters a great deal. What Luke is telling us here is a scandal. The Word of God bypassed all of the ruling powers. The Word of God bypassed all of the one-percenters and goes straight to the last person you would expect. Let me put it another way, if I may paraphrase Luke. In the second year of the first term of President Donald Trump, with Mike Pence second in line, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer, and Nancy Pelosi running things at the east end of Pennsylvania Avenue, with Chief Justice John Roberts and the rest of the Supreme Court in their black robes ready to strike down anything that comes their way, with Pope Francis sitting in St. Peter's throne in Rome, the Word of God appeared to a cleaning woman living in government housing in inner city Richmond. Do you see it now? Luke tells us the Word of God comes not to those whom we'd expect, not to the rulers and the powers that be. Instead, it comes to John, way out in the desert, in the wilderness, the last person you would expect, far from the corridors of power. What Luke is telling us is that a new kingdom is about to burst on the scene. A new king is about to be born, and his name is Jesus. And when Jesus is born, he will bring salvation. He will bring hope. He will bring that elusive peace. And isn't this the way that God always works, church? God always works through people like John, the last person on earth we'd expect to bring the good news of Christ. God works through ordinary people like you and me to bring the good news of Advent hope to this world. I read last week about a gentleman named James McCoy, and I'd like to tell you about him. James is a very troubled man. He was much more troubled, to be sure. Something as simple as a trip to the grocery store used to send him into a panic. When James, an Iraq War veteran, heard a child crying at the mall, he remembered kids screaming in Fallujah. Coins jingling in the cash register reminded him of that ammunition that he would have to carry around his neck. He would be in a store aisle and suddenly forget why in the world he was there. James is just 33 years old. He suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. He has flashbacks when he's awake and nightmares when he's asleep. James said it takes hours to psych himself up just to go outside. But then some months ago, he met a woman named Mary Cortani. She's a local dog trainer. And when they met and she heard his story, she thought she might be able to help. So she trained a dog to live with James in hopes of giving him some peace. So James's new dog is named Iggy. Iggy waits until he falls asleep and then goes over to the wall and with her paw can turn off the lights. She wakes him whenever he has a nightmare, and she helps to create space between James and others when they're in a public place. Whenever he starts to have a panic attack or is overwhelmed with anxiety, Iggy can sense it, and she will put her paw on his leg. James kneels down and hugs Iggy until the anxiety passes. Because of Iggy, James said in this article, I now have peace. It sounds so simple, right? A man gets a dog. But to him, he says, I now have peace. It's no small thing indeed. What does this have to do with the coming of the Christ child? First, I believe it's important to remember that God works through ordinary people and maybe some ordinary dogs too, to bring the good news of Advent peace. Second, like Mary Cortani, the dog trainer, I believe we receive the Prince of Peace by helping others create as much peace as we can in the meantime. As I said at the beginning of this sermon, peace sounds so elusive. Where do we even start by trying to bring about peace in this world? I'm not sure I have a very sufficient answer, my friends, but I think it begins with receiving the peace that Christ brings and seeking to share that peace with others. What does this look like? How do we live this out? Well, I'd be willing to bet that you have a relationship that could use some mending. Do you have a relationship, perhaps, that you've even given up on? I wonder if you can hear the call of Christ to begin peace right there, within that relationship. Can you hear the call of Christ? Can you hear the call of Christ within your heart so clearly enough that you would want to pick up the telephone and say, "I'm sorry. I forgive you. Please forgive me"? I don't know, maybe Advent peace could begin right there. How do we prepare for the coming of the Christ child? We do so by creating and sharing peace with one another wherever we can. Amen.